Welcome to Portals of Perception and to a special Journey to the Source conversation with Grace Boda and Vander Clute. Grace, Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Aviv.
So you have just returned from an adventure hiking up the Himalayas to the source of the Ganges. And there are several portals and guilds that are of great interest. First is just the nature and the impact of both choreographed and spontaneous transformational experiences, and pilgrimages is part of that. So we're interested in the communion and the transformational potential of an experience like that. A second involves the teacher's journey, and that's an ongoing inquiry for us. And the third concerns the group dynamic, because you assembled a group and there is the fascination of how that plays out when you bring a few humans together. Perhaps they have a shared experience before, perhaps not, and they're in a new day, in a new time, in a new context. Perhaps we can begin first with here and now. You've just been back for a few days. So how are you? What has it been like getting back home?
Yes, thank you for asking that. I am back in my home right now in body, but I would say that I can't claim to be entirely located here. I think the larger consciousness that we opened up that began to hold such a big, vast field of awareness is still so open in me that I'm feeling very present still in the Himalayas and with all of our group members and at other levels of creation. So you're catching, just speaking for myself, you're catching me in a moment of not quite having fully landed all the way back here, and maybe never will. I'm really just kind of delighting in the expansion that I'm holding as a result of our journey. I'm sure we'll say more about that in a bit, but I'll let Jeff say where he is.
Well, interestingly, I was back in the USA for 3 days. I flew back for a family wedding. On a Thursday night, I arrived into the Washington, D.C. area. And 12 hours later, it was clear that Mother India wanted me back, that the mountains were calling. The plans that I had made in the U.S. Were wonderful, but somehow the logistics and the costs and all these factors were adding up to be a pretty strong signal that something else was trying to happen. And then I did a search for flights back to India, and lo and behold, there was a shockingly affordable option on Swiss Airlines. And it's one of the signals that I pay attention to when life is opening the doors and making it really easy, practically, financially, energetically. That says something to me. So I booked a ticket and flew back the day after the wedding. So I'm in Delhi, and one of the benefits of not fully adjusting to the US time zone is that it was really easy coming back to India Standard Time. And I don't rightly know exactly where my field is. It seems like, as Grace said, it has expanded to a point where it's not easily localizable. So sure, the Jeff body is sitting in a hotel in Delhi, and yet I feel the mountains very strongly. In fact, I'm going back into the mountains at the beginning of June to a higher elevation. The source of the Ganges, or Ganga, is at 13,000 feet, and I'm going to 15,000 feet. There's something about altitude that is really calling me, and there's something to explore and no doubt something to learn from these high places.
Fascinating. So I didn't know we were going to have this conversation and you're going to be back in India. So we want to explore all that you are describing in the sense of opening and the other dimensions that you experience. Perhaps before we go there, can you give some context to how this pilgrimage, how this journey came about? What was the catalyzing inspiration? And also, how did you logistically organize and brought together a group to embark on this journey together?
Well, perhaps I can begin. I was in India last autumn on a scouting mission, and early last year, 2023, it suddenly dawned on me that I was far from complete with India, or India was far from complete with me, and it was time to go back. After a few years of not being there, I was in India at the beginning of the pandemic, and then borders closed, and for 3 or so years I stayed away, and other things happened, and all of that was fine and graceful. But then India started calling again. So it occurred to me that pilgrimage was calling, and so I went to a couple of the very sacred sites in the Himalayas, Kedarnath and Badrinath, which are part of the Char Dham, 4 sacred places in the northern state of Uttarakhand. And it was a relatively short trip, a lot of time in the car, and enough time and enough quality time in the mountains to really feel that there's more here, and this is just the beginning. And I could feel there's going to be another pilgrimage, maybe a proper pilgrimage, we could say. And so I started to just talk casually with people about the possibility of going back to India, and specifically to the source of the Ganges. So the work that I do is, we could call it sourcing. The company is called Sourcing the Way. So the source of things is very meaningful to me. And to have an embodied experience of going to the source sort of brings it all home, literally and figuratively. What I didn't know at the time that this idea first started percolating is that Gangotri, which is the last, let's say, town you can drive to, is not the actual source. It's regarded as the place to go on pilgrimage. But if you want to go to the actual source, it's a 14 or a 16 kilometer trek to the Gangotri Glacier at, as I said before, 13,000 feet. So there was a bigger commitment involved than I had initially realized. So people started to express interest in the course of having conversations. I wasn't even really inviting people. I just said, hey, here's an idea. And one person said, oh, I'm there. And then another person said, oh, yeah, I'm going. Oh, I guess we're going then. There are 3 of us. And then I spoke with Grace, and there was a strong sense that we could co-host a gathering. And, a yatra is the term for pilgrimage in Hindi. And then something very interesting happened, which relates to your question about organization. It became clear that actually we're going as a field, as a collective exploring co-leadership. So it isn't actually Jeff and Grace co-leading the expedition. In fact, we're all peers, and there are different responsibilities that we take on given our situations and experience, and maybe in my case some modest expertise, having been in the Himalayas before. But a lot of people can say that. And it sort of emerged. A few more people said yes. There was a retreat in Mexico at the beginning of January where I said, hey, something is happening in May. And 2 or 3 more people said, we're in. Never was this journey to the source promoted. There was no post on social media. There was no email outreach to see who might be interested. And everyone who joined us came because there was already a connection, pre-existing relationship. I had worked with them or met them at one of the retreats. And so there was a coherence that was inbuilt by virtue of this field that had been created over a period of years, actually. And, the experience that we had actually reflected that coherence. And we'll circle back to what it was like being together. Maybe, Grace, you can comment on the backstory and the setup as well.
Yeah, from my perspective, similar to Jeff, I had made annual trips to India for many years and then stopped during the pandemic and hadn't had any desire to go back. And then in the beginning of 2023, I was telling Jeff when I eventually reached out to him, India is knocking on my door. Like, it was persistent. It was a summons. And then I started really getting in meditation communion with the field the conscious field of the Mahavatar Babaji, which is not something that I had been connected to prior or had any particular draw to, but it was also knocking on my door. And I really felt like, okay, I'm listening, I'm being summoned. So I thought, well, I don't know what this is, but I'm willing, like it will reveal itself at some point in time. And so I pinged Jeff at one point and said, hey, India's knocking on my door. And I think this was last fall. And he said, well, funny you should say that because, I'm thinking about this thing. Would you like to co-host? So I think what's important about that from my perspective is, unlike some group experiences that we might have participated in past years, professionally, where there's more of a facilitated led kind of a thing, this was really, well, I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but one of the things that we talked about as a collective was relinquishing the idea of causality, of any one person taking credit or blame for anything, that just everything causes each thing. And so the kind of coming together of all the forces that cause an experience to arise in consciousness. And that's what it felt like for me, was just, okay, I hear the knock. I don't know what it is. I'm going to just be a yes before I know, and then slip into the river just, when it feels like the right time. And I think that's how everyone engaged it. So Jeff, you did much more of the kind of detailed, to whatever degree there was any of that. But I don't think there was a lot of logistics other than finding a time to get on a Zoom call and figuring out where to meet. It just pretty much brought itself together.
And Grace, in your first post, you wrote, the journey to the source is underway. 8 of us traveled from Germany, India, Sweden, Mexico, and the US to meet in Rishikesh, am I pronouncing that correctly? Where we have been grounding and getting our bodies settled down after the long journeys to get here, gearing up, cohering as a group, and turning our collective awareness. So describe what happens from that point as you begin to unfold the journey, please.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, would you like to chime in, or would you like me to go?
Why don't you continue, since this is related to the post that you posted?
Okay. Excuse me. So we did gather. People arrived in, within a several day time frame, but not simultaneously. We sort of welcomed one another in, people landing a bit at a time. And as that happened, a few of the people knew each other, but many had never met. So it was an opportunity just to kind of begin to feel, who are we? Like, what is this? And to just kind of check in with what was emerging in dream time, in our bodies, in our awareness, at our meals. And so again, it wasn't a really led or facilitated, it was more an emergent process. This is a group of people who all are very capable and skilled at kind of listening behind material reality and attuning awareness together. And so we practiced kind of, I think, in our conversations, bringing that attunement to one another. And then there were some really practical things, like everybody needs hiking boots and, just kind of getting ourselves organized. But all I think it was just very easy and very natural. So that was the part that was just about kind of, okay, we're gathered. We are a group of 8. And, I'm thinking, we had a few preliminary conversations just about what it means to go all the way, all the way to the source, to each of us. And so we kind of dropped some of those thoughts, into our collective container. And they sometimes got referred back to as the journey unfolded. But I think largely what happened as we went further along the journey, and we can take that more step by step, but as we went further along is we dropped down out of any kind of conscious processing, and we're just so deeply present as a collective field that the insights, the awareness, the changes in experience began to be more, when I say collectively held, I don't even mean just by the group, but by the world. We were watching manifest creation responsively mirroring what was going on with us and in our conversations just instantly. And we were just feeling the kind of, I guess, unitive expression of what was taking form, way beyond individual people having ideas or sharing thoughts. I think we dropped below that level really, really quickly. Would you add to that about our initial start, Jeff?
Yeah, and I would back up a little bit to talk about the architecture of the journey,
Right. Yeah.
all of which was sourced. So when I say sourcing, I mean listening deeply for the right timing and the right sequencing of activities and sacred places to visit. And that happened over a period of time such that it could be deliberate and attuned to the larger field. And interestingly enough, the dates that were sourced without any knowledge of the season for such pilgrimages was about a week before the pilgrimage season in terms of the actual journey to the source of Ganga. And so we were ahead of massive crowds that would later, soon after, descend upon the roads, and Gangotri and some smaller percentage of pilgrims would continue on with the trek. So we had a delightful setup in terms of the spaciousness and the experience of the mountains in an uncluttered way. And before we ascended, we were, as noted, in Rishikesh for 3 days minimum. Some people arrived earlier and were there for 5 days. I was in Rishikesh for about 2 weeks beforehand, just settling in and in some ways preparing the field, which was already exquisitely prepared. India is exquisitely prepared to welcome the sincere pilgrim. And once we were together, all of us, it's worth noting that the group included a very skilled and experienced organizer of tours and treks named Tarun Singh. And his company, Winterline Tours, has been arranging experiences like this for maybe 30 years. So when we talk about the ease and effortlessness of the logistics, it ought to be noted that that was significantly due to the presence of an actual logistical master who knows India and Nepal and Bhutan and the places and the timings and how to get things done, how to work a very complicated system. Indian bureaucracy is complicated, and you need permits and you need permissions. And because we were ahead of the yatra season, we needed special permissions. And that turned out to be slightly glitchy. And Tarun had the skill to navigate those glitches and deliver a beautiful result. So when all 8 of us, including Tarun, were gathered in Rishikesh, we ate together. We had conversations about what it means to go to the source. I played with very rudimentary Hindi to feel into the culture. We went to the what's known as the Jesus Cave. The actual name is the Vashishta Gufa. So Vashishta was one of the great sages of ancient India, and apparently Jesus showed up there at some point as well. So that was helping to establish the energetics and the consciousness that would then carry us forward. And all of us honored Ganga, went down to the river repeatedly. There was puja, a kind of ceremonial offering and observance, really an devotional act to Ganga and also Shiva. And there was a certain amount of getting acclimated to the heat. It was quite warm, but not when we went up in the mountains. Then it was rather cold. So some of us had altitude considerations, and there were natural supplements as well as allopathic options in such cases. And I would say we took the time to be prepared mentally, physically, spiritually, and even emotionally. There were moments at the beginning when things would come up for people, and that was short-lived. The field was very powerful in supporting whatever processing was needed so that we could individually and then collectively become coherent and aligned with the mission.
And the insight about this being not just led by the two of you, but co-led, co-facilitated, co-held by everybody, that emerged several months before, I gather. And what is it that you thought you were, what was the shared intention? What is it you thought you were actually embarking on before you arrived there? And then I'd like to lead to that point when you reach the last town and begin the trekking up the mountains.
What did we think we were doing? Speaking for myself, I was answering the call. I was just saying yes, I was summoned. And I think many people felt that way. This was not a trip where people thought, oh, I've always wanted to see India, or what a great athletic event. This was people responding from a deep, deep heart, from source in their own nature, just being a yes. And so to the degree that there was any consciously held intention, Jeff, I'll be curious about your thoughts. I mean, we did have some of the conversation, like, what does it mean to go all the way to the source for each of us in our own lives? What does it mean to source? How do I source that might be different than how Jeff sources? What does that look like in our lives? And what can we learn from that? So those were kind of conversations we had in Rishikesh before we really got going up the mountain. But my experience of the whole thing was that the characters, each of our, names and forms were what's the word I'm looking for? Brought into a larger happening that wasn't about us setting intention, but was about each of us being a yes and allowing our presence to be an embodiment individually and collectively of a greater happening, if that makes any sense. What would you add, Jeff?
Yeah, well, makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. The name came early on, Journey to the Source, and the name says enough and resonates strongly enough with the heart that it was a sufficient intention. And beyond that, it became clear that this was an opportunity to practice co-leadership, sourced co-leadership even, where we're all listening in our own ways, like Grace said. Maybe she sources differently from the way I source, and fantastic. In fact, synergistic when we bring it all together. So there was some sense that we might learn in an embodied way, because we're going to the source in an embodied way. We're not just talking about source and some abstraction, like actually going to a source that has been held in sacred regard for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years. So it's a very embodied and visceral experience that grounds the notion of source in our beings. So there was some sense that with this level of grounding, there might be gifts that we could bring back into our lives and into our roles, and in leadership specifically. How do we lead in a way that is deeply sourced in truth and reality and love and compassion, and in a time when compassion is very much needed? So, those were some thoughts, but those came a little later. It was already a yes for everyone, and the journey to the source was a clear enough summons for people to say yes.
And you are then beginning to hike, heading to the top of the mountain, or in that region, and to the glacier that is the source of the Ganges. So describe that journey and what's it like, and how are you orienting yourself every day, and what is the nature of the process? And by the way, you have not gone on any massive fitness practice and readiness before, but this was a pretty significant hike, correct?
Was actually astounding, I think, since everybody was a yes before we knew even what the physical requirements of it were. I don't think any of us intentionally trained for it or did anything in particular, but we were, I mean, it was miraculous, the degree to which every single one of us got all the way up and all the way down with barely a sore muscle. I mean, we were tired when it was over, but really no injuries, no, it was astounding. I would say, in response to the what was it like, we each person kept their own pace, found their own path at some points, when we were picking our way across rock fields and things like that. Um, and each was in their kind of their own process with the witness of the majesty, being right in the center at the feet of and up among in the lap of the Himalayas is an astounding experience. Just the massive, majestic witness of these ancient mountains. And so, to some degree, we may at different times have been having what may have appeared to be different experiences, but it was all part of this collective field that we were cultivating. Jeff alluded earlier, our guide had taken care with us that we, in advance of journeying upward, asked for blessings and gave gratitude at each of the local temples. So we were part of the devotional practice and of the river Ganga, of the Ganges River, but also of the area that we're moving up through. And so we were entering very deeply into a devotional field. And so we became a little bit quiet and inward as we moved up, as each person kind of found their own, devotional space from which we were walking. And we would sometimes say things like one resonant step after another, one step in communion and awareness, and the next step and the next. So this wasn't a chatty kind of athletic event at all. This was deeply devotional for all of us.
Yes, and maybe to add some more specifics around what you just shared, Grace, we stayed in a village called Darali, which is a bit lower than Gangotri, 8,000 something feet instead of 11,000 feet. And so that allowed us to acclimate to the altitude. We were there for a couple of days, and we went up to Gangotri and down and up and down. And so our bodies had a chance to get familiar with the rarefied air. And during that time, we went to Mukba, which is the winter shrine of Ganga. So there is a deity, you could say an idol. But in the non-duality, interestingly, the idol is the god or the goddess. So we're not minimizing. This is not a representation of Ganga. It is Ganga. And Ganga was present in the winter shrine because the yatra season had not yet begun. And because no one was around, we had direct access to the goddess and offered our devotion and service, really. We were there in a sacred way to be of service, as well as to receive the benefits and the healing and the wisdom. I could feel actually that in offering our service, that's when things were really lit up. It's like, okay, so you're not just taking, you're giving, you're bringing your gifts, let's say from the West, and together we can really have an experience, and we can perhaps co-create something. And I mean co-creation between Ganga and the pilgrims. So we were there, I would say, in high service. And when we were actually trekking, I said before 14 to 16 kilometers, that was day one to the base camp in Bojbas. And then it was another 5 kilometers at the high altitude to get to the actual glacier. There was a point, I'll speak for myself, where one step at a time was really all I could do. And I was wondering how I was going to have the energy to take all the remaining steps. I knew it would happen. I just knew. And then it occurred to me, okay, surrender to the limitations of the physical body. Just be with the experience. Don't fight it. Surrender completely to this process that you're in. And then humbly, very humbly, ask for the assistance, the help, the energy, the literal inspiration to proceed. And interestingly, something happened almost immediately after that. I looked down and there was a ladybug on my pants at 12,000 feet. Without a lot of vegetation, it didn't seem like there would be a lot of ladybugs around. And in my life experience, ladybugs have shown up as divine messengers, if you will. So that was comforting. And then I continued, and suddenly I was infused with energy, and I practically ran the remaining third of the way to the base camp. So that was the first time I had such an experience. And then I ran the experiment 2 more times, surrendering fully to the limitations of the physical body, asking to receive all assistance, whatever forms of assistance I might think I need, and any forms that I don't realize I need. And on all 3 occasions, there was this infusion of divine energy, and it lifted me, literally lifted me. And other people had similar experiences, and it showed me that, again, a very like embodied way, the importance of pilgrimage, going to the edge of our comfort zone and the edge of our physical capacity, even to realize and transcend our limitations, and to do it in a sacred way, calling upon something larger than what we think we are, is one of the opportunities of pilgrimage.
So you are describing, you're decoding the inner nature of pilgrimage. You're describing, number 1, showing up with a devotional intent to give rather than to just take, to be in service, to be in high service. And then when faced with physical challenge, or even without, surrendering to the limitation of the physical body and asking for assistance, and then finding assistance, and then enacting and bringing to life that assistance. What else would you add, Grace, from your experience in what can be physically challenging kind of a hike, especially if you don't go to the gym every day to practice for hours in preparation, but it sounds like you've made it safely. So what would you add about your experience?
To echo what Jeff was saying, I think it was really important that each of us in our own way was at and beyond some physical comfort limit. There was something really important about that kind of challenge, and each in our own way, the surrender and the receipt that we had of, I would say receive, maybe transcendence. We simply rose above what we believed were limits before. We didn't fix a problem or somehow find a way around it. We simply rose above some of what had seemed challenging before. I think one of the most remarkable aspects for me, or in this moment, one of the things that stands out to me, mirroring Jeff's surrender experience with the ladybug, was there was a particular peak along the way up there, and I have a photograph of it if that's helpful, called Padmasan. And it's, these 28,000 foot peaks. It's a giant, majestic peak. And at the very top of it is a natural formation that is like a detailed carving almost of, it looks like the Lord Shiva in lotus position, a meditating master in lotus position. And that's what was the turning point for me, because I realized, wow, which came first, and I'm sure they co-arose, but the field of devotion that's created by all the many hundreds of years, maybe, of pilgrims, thousands of pilgrims going up and down in devotion to Lord Shiva. And so a majestic, giant, ancient mountain takes on the shape of what their devotion is, or that mountain's shape, the natural formation that looks like it was carved of the God that is worshipped in that area, enhancing the devotion of those who go up. And so Jeff and I and the rest of the group had talked about creator creating creation, creating creator. You can't exclude any part of it, or this is where causality falls apart. Like the happening is mutual and shared and participatory, and it's all one happening. That devotion is happening here. And so the mountain takes the form of a meditating Lord. And so the devotees walk up and down in the presence of that mountain. And so I just realized that when my attention is collapsed into the particular experience at a physical level of this seemingly individual body, I'm shut off from really what's truly happening in and through and around and as me and everything else. And so that softening allowed, in the places where it was a little rougher on my physicality or where I was experiencing my edge, that is what just kind of opened me up. And I realized I am a field of devotion. That is what I am anyway. And that's what all things are. And that's what's happening here. And so everything just kind of opened up after that.
And so there appears to be a significance in what you're describing to the dimension of reaching to some kind of an edge, physically being stretched and getting out of one's comfort zone and needing to source and access some other energy, some other capacity. And also you're describing that along that physical experience, there is the interior mental experience of also dropping whatever structures, whatever projections, whatever formations we carry, such that we become truly available to be in communion with what this place you are describing represents. And so what in the aftermath of that experience, as you're reaching that source and you have these, in one way or another, I imagine, the life of being inside the experience, and there is the other inner awareness that's observing the life of you that's in the experience, that's seeking to sooner or later offer some, if not translation, integration and conscious notation of what it is that you're experiencing. Describe that turning point where you get all the way to the top, and at some point you got to say, okay, we've got to begin the journey back to the world. I'm asking about this because this has been a key framing in several of the inquiries, in several of the conversations with Jeff. When we describe the three journeys, there is the aspect of journeying to source, to the high point of communion, and at some point you begin the journey back, and in some way there is a need to hold these to the experience. It's a non-dual to, but the experience you've been in, and at the same time giving yourself some account about what it is you've been in that you want to begin to take on the journey back. These are my words. You may completely choose to describe it differently, so I welcome anything you'd say in response to that.
Well, let me start by saying, from the beginning, once we were gathered in Rishikesh, the conversation naturally flowed to an exploration of releasing small self. So it's one thing to release ego and patterns of maybe dysfunctional defendedness, and yet there's still a sense of a self. And the self could seem small, the self could even seem big, the self could seem universal, and it's still infinitesimal compared to the infinite. So if we're going to the actual source, which is fundamentally infinite, maybe transfinite, I might say, then there's a shedding, or at least a relaxing around any sense of small self or self at all. So it becomes difficult to put into words the experience when the experiencer is not experiencing. Let me speak in terms of my own seemingly individual journey. On the way up, even starting in Rishikesh, there was a lightning strike, and I realized, oh, this is going to be about love. And I've written about love. I'm a fan of love. I would have said I knew something about it. And while climbing and then eventually trekking a much more full and in some sense transcendent knowing beyond concepts of what love really is, descended on me or upwelled through me, and very humbling, by the way, and to realize just how much more there was, and also totally delightful and even actually blissful. So getting to the source at the Gomukh Glacier, maybe we can share some photos with you. You could include with this interview. There was the devotional act of actually making the trek. I then expressed devotion by fully prostrating to the actual source where the water was coming, and stay there for some time and just inwardly gave, committed to give all, total love, total service, total devotion to Ganga, in alignment with whatever is all the way. And at the same time, total openness to receive without asking specifically, just to receive whatever Ganga wishes to impart. And then we're there for maybe an hour or two probably, and it's time to turn around. The clouds start gathering, so that's the sign, time to go back to Bojbasa. And it was quite a blissful trek back down, so 5 kilometers up to the glacier, 5 kilometers back down, 10 in total, an appreciable walk over quite a rugged rock field most of the way. And when we arrived, there was a sense of great accomplishment. What's most interesting for me is what happened in the middle of the night. After going to bed at 7 p.m. and falling asleep quite promptly, I was also quite awake at 1 a.m. and that was it. There was no resting, and I actually didn't need it. I felt completely energized. And then the question after about an hour was, okay, well, what's going on here? And I realized that I was having a total life reboot. And with the benefit of a little bit of hindsight, I can say that the nature of the reboot was a reorientation from mining truth, like rigorously mining truth in every circumstance. What is true? What is true? What is true? What is true? What is real? And what is not? That had been my inquiry for many years, subsequent to going all the way to the source and having this embodied experience. The inquiry changed to expressing love. So love actually now was flowering, and I realized that the purpose of this incarnation now is to express love, grounded in truth, knowing source, having been to source, having realized I've never been, and we've never been anywhere other than source. Now we can play. Now we can delight in creation. Now we can express and share love in a true way.
So I can actually experience what you are transmitting and emitting in this, and it has a particular sensation at the back of the head, which it would if there is a reboot and a reconfiguration of this incident that you are in this life, and there is a re-centering around a new next center of gravity. It will, in actual sense, manifest in the subtle field of the person that you are. So I can actually feel that as you speak, which, if you like, is an external validation that what you're describing has an actuality beyond the words and the concepts. Let me make space here for Grace. Whatever you want to say next, please.
And it feels almost like enough said on that. I mean, I could share a little bit about the correlate for me, which had to do with the words were in my mind all the way up and all the way down, and they had emerged in prior conversations about being unwaveringly established in foundational power. And, I was really not actively inquiring into that, but just noticing as the revelations came to me about what that is, to be unwaveringly established in foundational power. That bore full fruit by the end of my journey way back in Delhi when it was all over. It blossomed in another way. But as I opened to that over the course of going up, and then coming down was a lot easier and a lot faster. And there was like a tendency almost to want to just go fast down, but really slowing myself down and realizing, what is it to be unwaveringly established in foundational power? Part of that for me was having my attention and an aspect of my attention seated all the time in the, how do I want to say this? The emerging pattern of life creating, just as things are coming into manifestation and a pattern is unfolding, and being able to enliven with my own awareness there, not intentionally, not because my ego or personality wants to make something happen, but just because it's the nature of being, to have attention and awareness anchored in this aspect of the unmanifest and the manifest emerging and dissolving, that kind of life and death process at every level, in every way. And with awareness seated there, just how easy it became to know myself and to know all things as part of that universal happening, that's arising and dissolving, and just the perfection and the benevolence of it. And so I was really just overcome with, gratitude, awe, bliss, which are not uncommon things for me to be overcome by, but the release, because of the physical challenge of it, being taken to a place where there was a temptation to collapse into, what is my body doing? And then the release of that, to be just so present at a level so fundamental to the experience of life. And one of the themes that had come up in some sourcing Jeff did with me was around deathlessness, which has been showing up in lots of ways in my life recently. And so that deeper inquiry with awareness in that foundational power, by enlivening and moving with easily that larger pattern of life creating and dissolving manifestations, and creating and dissolving, that awareness of the life-death kind of process or experience, I guess I'll say, opened up a way of holding my attention that just seemed to allow everything to resolve. And I noticed it in conversations with other people who would, just approach me and begin talking about something and then experience some sort of resolution. And I was just sitting there paying attention, like giving my awareness to that bliss level of the being that was emerging and arising, that was being created and dissolved right there. So I would say, maybe if I could say this briefly, would be presence to the power of the entire experience of life and death, and of what's even transcendent of that, of just being, just the pure bliss of being in all of its manifested and unmanifested experiences.
Yeah, I'm experiencing again in a somatic way when you describe and use these 4 words: unwavering, established, foundational power. I can experience the grounding of that. So there is the transfinite universe at large as one strata. There is the devotional field in this place where people have made for thousands of years pilgrimage. There is the personal experience of the individual, of you deciding to, in this time, at this time, in this circumstance, and 2024, make the journey. And for me, and that may not be part of the where you hold the the map of meaning, there is also the what is occurring right now evolutionarily, that is not just an incident that lives inside eternity, but has a certain teleology in the unfolding human story. And so it is in that context that I'm asking, what is it we can learn? What is it we need to learn inside this idea of making a pilgrimage and trekking where great teachers in generations in the past walked and meditated and prayed, and in some cases, in the place where you've been, people who performed some miraculous capacities and capabilities of transmission, of healing, of telepathy. So what is all this imparting to you about this time? And you talked earlier about the integration, the emergence of the Ganges with India, the East with the West. Is there a message? Is there a transmission? Is there an integration that you would offer that comes out of a pilgrimage like this? And what is inside it, the importance and the meaning of making a pilgrimage?
Well, I can't say that I've undertaken many pilgrimages like this. This was definitely a unique experience, and yet I feel there will be many more to follow, including Kailash next summer. So the patterns may become more apparent with more experiences. Let me say that perhaps because this group was ultra coherent, we were somehow able to become a conscious microcosm of the whole, of, let's say, the species, and even the whole Gaian system, and offer ourselves in service to the transformation of the entirety and the healing of the human family, for instance. And perhaps we could do this any day of the week, and yet to be in such a profoundly powerful and benevolent place with the deities, with the rock formations that may have inspired some of the deities that have been around for maybe hundreds of thousands of years, if not longer. Now, this is deep stuff. So we're going to the source and we're going to the roots, and we're able to be correspondingly empowered in our service and devotion to the transformation of humanity at this time, and hopefully the up-leveling of our collective capacity to be together on this planet and in right relationship. So I wouldn't be able to come up with too many specific examples, but I would say that the emotional fluctuations, the experiences of some kind of illness, usually very short-lived, kind of initiatory bug or motion sickness or whatever it was, it had an effect not only on the individual and on the collective of us 8, but my sense is it had an effect on all who had connected into this field, because they knew about the journey. They were maybe considering joining the journey. A few people were considering it and it didn't work out, but nevertheless, they reported having profound experiences during that time interval. And many people I work with also have shared, wow, those last 2 weeks were really something. So, it's anecdotal evidence, and yet I sense that with pilgrimage, there is the opportunity to be individually transformed, and there is the opportunity to, plug into the universal power main and give back into the collective. And time will tell, but my sense is there was a disproportionate, seemingly nonlinear impact on the field of this planet and the people who inhabit her.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. There was one, I'll just add one piece we didn't mention. After we had come down, we followed the Ganges River through several of its confluences, different rivers that were joining it, where it ultimately becomes the very big Ganges River. And ended right before, like at the end of our journey, at a beautiful nature sanctuary, a place to stay called Camp Sparrow that was really just amazing birds and a beautiful sanctuary. And in that, it was a very beautiful kind of restful place to integrate a little bit and to just be together at the end of our journey. There was a day there where more than half of the people in the group chose to go to the ashram of Haidakhan Babaji, a particular ashram. And two of us stayed back and decided we just felt like, no, there's some reason we need to stay back. So when we did that, that was one of the two that stayed back. The two of us who stayed back took a little hike, just kind of picking up bird feathers, not doing anything meaningful or intentional, and came to the top of a hill and stumbled across a giant crucifix, which is not what you expect in India. It's not a very Christian area. And there were all the stations of the cross leading down, and people raised as Catholics would understand what that is. And so we decided, the two of us that were discovering this, like, oh, who knew? That's not accidental. So why don't we uplift? Why don't we bring all of this expansion and all of this source consciousness, this oneness, into this story that's depicted in carvings with each of the kind of moments along the crucifixion of Jesus? Why don't we uplift this story? Why don't we see the deepest truth we can see in this story? And so we went through like blessing and uplifting and bringing consciousness to each of these levels and reached the termination of it just in the moment that we got a ping from the other group that they had entered the Haidakhan Babaji ashram. So we were bringing East and West. It was kind of a full circle moment where we had been noticing the bringing together of East and West and the uplifting of all the narratives, the kind of long held and cultivated and curated cultural narratives about organized religion and spirituality, and just bringing it as much as we were able to, both into integration, but also into expansion. So that was just kind of a lovely moment, I think, of full circle completion about the larger world too. But to say something about the pilgrimage piece, it struck me as really important that, because we are all source. I can sit right here in my chair and go to the source, right? And I am the source. But it was important, and it struck me by the end of our time together, how critically important that we're able to enliven consciousness and to occupy in consciousness all levels of the density of expression and experience. So we're not transcendent of everything. It takes us to that different conversation, longer conversation about what's real and not real and what's, all of that, but not transcendent of great swaths of our experience, but inclusive as well as transcendent, so that we bring our highest consciousness and our truest sense of the bliss of being into all aspects, all degrees of experience, of awareness. And so because we were challenged physically and we were interpersonally in relationship, we were really bringing that deep awareness and developing coherence, not only among each other, but in the levels of being, of self, so that it felt like a very integrative experience. And that's different than I might have alone sitting in this chair in meditation. So that felt like a really critical part of the pilgrimage piece.
The sense, the intuition, the belief for some that all axial religions are reaching a point of needing to make another turn, needing to make another transcendence, needing to make another updating configuration, and in some sense converge with other traditions and religions. That sense has been around for maybe 2 centuries. There are appearances of it in the 1800s, in the 1900s, certainly into the later half of the 20th century. there is that expression of world leaders in some of those large faith traditions more than before beginning to meet each other. It seems that now that update or that convergence or that release for whatever it is that is now seeking to find and access the human family on this beautiful planet we call Earth is working through all people. And so I wonder if there is anything you'd say to that, given just where you described that full circle experience. Is there any additional awareness or message that you feel is alive with you about, number one, the updating of that next, whatever next is, phase for those axial traditions, and number two, in what it is that they may be called to do together to help humanity first avoid any any civilizational complete elimination that we are certainly now capable in ways that we haven't been capable in previous centuries as humanity, or anything else really that you carry as an awareness, as a consciousness, agency on behalf of those traditions.
Well, isn't it interesting that all of the major religions and traditions that emerge from the axial age have a luminary figure, usually a man, a God man, a realized, enlightened one, who is somehow more or more exalted maybe than like the rest of us. And if there is a second coming, it is all of us. So this time, the upwelling impulse of enlightenment is a collective enlightenment. And this is not a new idea. Thich Nhat Hanh said the next Buddha may be a Sangha, and others have said similar things over the centuries, in fact. So I would say that in this microcosmic experience that we had, there was a collective presence, a collective awakeness that we experienced, which was filling us from a source beyond any personal identity, and I would say even beyond transpersonal identity. So there's an invitation to continue to explore this upwelling impulse. It will happen regardless. It can happen more smoothly and much more joyfully to the extent that it's conscious. So we're invited to be with the possibility that the upgrade of the world traditions is, it's not one God man. It's good to have God women too. What about enlightened community? What about enlightened society? What about enlightened institutions? Not the individual lights in a sea of darkness. The light is very strong now. In fact, it is so strong, it's disruptive. And the disruptions that we experienced on the pilgrimage were, again, individual instances of a collective disruption. And as we processed them, metabolized, resolved our individual situations, work was done on behalf of the whole. And now religion has an opportunity to up its game and be more inclusive and be more integrative. There's an interspiritual movement that goes even beyond interfaith, connecting not only the quote major religions, especially the Abrahamic faiths, but all religious impulses and enduring lineages that have stood the test of time. Indeed, they are one. There is one source, many expressions, but ultimately all are more than unified. All is really source. The apple doesn't fall from the tree. The apple is still the tree.
I'm experiencing, curiously, as I receive what you are describing and transmitting there, Jeff, a new or additional nuance, which is when the luminosity of the light is so strong and when you feel so complete inside it, you are even more aware that to the degree that there are still shadows or darkness somewhere, you are yourself still in the process of emanating, expanding that light, because if there is a shadow in me that is not fully illuminated, then also there is a part of you that cannot be fully illuminated, in that we are together joined. So the more illuminated you are, the more still the shadow around the world and the darkness around the world that you are working to liberate. That's the nuance that I'm getting inside what you are describing.
Maybe I could just tag on to that a little bit. And it relates to teachers and the tendency to put teachers on a pedestal and perhaps regard them as perfect. Like the founders of the major religions perhaps have been regarded as perfect. I will hazard to say, if there is shadow anywhere, there's shadow in me. If there's woundedness anywhere, there's woundedness in me. We are all co-participating in the field of healing and resolution. And so none of us is above the work that is required. And we are all participating to various degrees and maybe with various flavors in the great healing that is upon us. And so we can be very humble and at the same time, perhaps not too humble, because it's a false humility that says, oh, no, I'm not worthy. I'm not source. That I'm not that God man or God woman, like they're the perfect ones. That is separation.
This seems like a good time to just briefly say what the final experience for me in Delhi was that was integrated for me around this topic. Our journey had completed and we'd gone our separate ways, and I had a day or so in Delhi before my flight back. So I went to the Lotus Temple, a Baha'i temple in Delhi, just to visit that. And the Baha'i faith, some of you may know, is really founded on the idea of universality, that all paths are talking about one divine source, one being, one oneness. And so as I walked into this huge temple ground, Jeff can attest, and anyone who's been to India, as a Westerner in India, there's a certain dynamic that can happen where you attract a lot of attention and everybody wants to take their picture with you. So that was happening as I walked in there. So there were hordes, bigger crowds than there had ever been in any of the other places we were. And it was 108 degrees, like pressing their bodies on me and trying to take pictures. And I was feeling a little bit like, back up. So I went into the temple and was meditating and had a really profound experience. So, and the reason that people so much wanted to take my picture, they really wanted me to know that I'm not a foreigner in India, that in the Baha'i faith, there are no foreigners. Every human is a citizen of planet Earth, and every religion is an expression of the same God. So they were making that clear. So I went and meditated in the temple, had this huge experience where I was, it doesn't feel right even to say I'll just say the experience was so far beyond any individual body. It was as if I embraced and knew all forms, every person, every rock, every tree, every mountain, all forms as aspects of my own being, as larger consciousness. And I felt and I thought, oh, this is what Divine Mother means. This is that idea that the divine adores and cherishes all expressions of itself, no matter who or what you've done, that all of this is expressions. And so I knew the larger self as all the forms. And so I left the temple and came out, and once again, the hordes of people, and it was still 108, were trying to take pictures and crowding in on me. And I was hearing the words exclude nothing, deny nothing, reject nothing, absolutely nothing. And so I could still have personal space and I didn't have to agree to every picture, but I had the experience of all of this. I'm not talking about is me, Grace Boda, but all of this is this self that oneness is, that source is. And that experience right there, I think, is what Jeff is alluding to too, around formalized religion. And people are beginning to get fatigued with this separation and to see through some of the challenges in the way that doctrine has been curated. But I think that's where we're going, into this sense that all expressions of being are ourself. And exactly like you're saying, if there is shadow anywhere, it's in me. If whatever I've got is also in the world, because there is no difference. And so that struck me also as a deepening for me of an understanding of foundational power, is that, we have personified it in some ways as Divine Mother, but what it really is consciousness knowing itself as all form and knowing itself beyond and giving expression to all form. So that feels to me like an important part of where we're headed.
Well, thank you for speaking from these rich and live experiences. I do want, as a closing question, to ask, is there anything else, particularly in this sense of transcending the traditional role of teachers and the way you described it, you cohered as a co-led, co-discovering, co-emerging, co-journeying, with each taking personal responsibility, but also each person taking full responsibility to the field. That's the practice of taking 200% responsibility. The first 100 is you take responsibility for yourself. The second 100 is you take responsibility for everything else. Is there anything else you can distill and decode about this transition, this us humans, where there is still an important role for Sherpas, for people that facilitate, that lead, that show sometimes the way, and at the same time we are looking to transcend, as you were describing earlier, Jeff, the one knowing all figure, often a man, in those traditions, to liberate a permission, a possibility, a way of being that is different. Anything else you'd say to that conundrum at this point in time?
Well, I'll say from my experience and what I've observed in quote others is when we're sourcing, when we're tapping into something deep and essential, and we open up to the inspiration, then the inspiration flows through us, and that brings with it a kind of knowing of right action in the moment, what the moment is calling for, and we can respond accordingly. And therefore, roles emerge. When a Sherpa is needed, you might find you're suddenly a Sherpa. Maybe you weren't a Sherpa before, but now you are. And when a teacher is needed, oh, well, you have something to share. You're now the teacher, and 10 minutes from now, you might be the student. So roles become very fluid and very malleable. And that means also that identity becomes much softer, and we can play with identity. The divine loves playing with identity. And when we're sourcing, it's actually play. When we're letting the intellect and like the structures of fear and defendedness run the show, that is certainly not play. Collectively, as humanity, when we are sourcing in our infinitely diverse ways, but listening deeply for how to be and how to move and how to act in the moment, then there is collective right action, and certain things don't happen. Wars don't happen. I'm going to make what sounds like a political statement. Factory farming doesn't happen, at least not in the way that is abusive. And many problems seem to sort themselves out as if of their own accord because we're operating from depth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I would underscore all of that and say that throughout this experience, we were manifesting this exact way, that we know exactly when we're holding a space of being with attention, as I was mentioning before, in an appreciative attention on the unfolding of a larger pattern of arisal, then we can just slip into the river just when it's needed. And with the lightest tap or touch, just move with what's happening in a way that doesn't require a lot of effort. There was a time over the pandemic, one of the groups that I was leading was an experiment. It was an attempt to be in spiritual community that was mystical. that was in direct communion with the divine, however each of us understood that. And our inquiry was about, how do we do this without replicating hierarchies or the belief that somebody has access that I don't, or, all of that that's sometimes present in more formal religions. And one of the members of this group happened to be a minister and gave me a piece of feedback that I think speaks to this. I had tried many things, like maybe we rotate leadership, or, and it just kept coming back like, you just do it, Grace. So I thought, okay, well, how are we not? we're back at that again. And so this minister said to me, there is a difference between being between ministry and chaplaincy. And she said, ministry is when you have an official role representing a particular dogma and you advance that message. And you're deigned to do that. Chaplaincy is a way of being where you walk around in the world, you never take off that jacket. You are just a field of being that facilitates awakening, awareness, transcendence everywhere that you go. So in that field of being, sometimes a role is required. Sometimes we step in as a Sherpa. Sometimes we tap the field. Sometimes we do something else. And sometimes we're just quiet in the back. But it's that kind of listening that Jeff's speaking to, that kind of attention on source that allows us to be just what's needed in every moment.
Well, thank you for leading us to the Ganges and to the source of the Ganges, and in some way giving us an opportunity to, as I know in reading your posts, Grace, that Jeff made sure to get his feet wet in every possible point you could in the Ganges. So perhaps we got our feet wet in this river, in this wash, and I get the sense that the journey continues. The Ganges continue to flow. The river of each of our lives continue to flow. The endeavor of humanity to find an updating, redeeming source is a journey that's continuing. And thank you very much for sharing from this recent adventure.
Yes, thank you, Aviv.
Thank you for the invitation to share.
Yes, namaste.
To be continued. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.